In other words, Venezuela's collapse began when the very few vested interests monopolized all the money earned from oil exports, and the economy began to collapse due to all kinds of corruption. In such a national crisis, Hugo Chavez appeared with the support of the people. As the government's corruption became severe and warfare was corrupt, public opinion began to turn, and leftist forces began to unite around this person, Chavez. Chavez, who advocated socialism, launched a campaign to oppose the government. His activities became the basis of support for him to become president later. In 1998, when Chavez was elected president with 56% of the vote, Venezuela began to take a socialist path in earnest according to his political colors. In the beginning, his policies were quite successful. In the meantime, if the conservative government had been greedy to fill their stomachs by cutting off warfare, Chavez started to gain popularity among the people by increasing warfare. By selling oil, Venezuela provided free medical care, education, and housing to the poor, and put effort into stabilizing people's lives. When finances became abundant, a state-run store was opened and the prices of all products were cut in half. Literally, Chavez was the king of warfare. Middle-class people were incredibly welcoming. However, there was a fatal problem hidden in Chavez's policy, which was extreme populism. In order to gain popularity with the people, the government would give what they wanted. If ordinary countries provided welfare in the form of collecting taxes and redistributing them, Venezuela would have a new type of economic system in which the state sells oil and provides welfare with the revenue. For this reason, most of the money earned from oil was used for welfare. But as the amount rapidly increased, the government's finances reached a dangerously high level. Artificially lowering the price of goods would be good for the poor person who buys goods, but the companies that supply them earn no profit, so the desire to do business disappears. Therefore, when the national finances were exhausted, most companies had already gone bankrupt, and the economic foundations such as manufacturing and distribution had collapsed. Now, self-sufficiency has reached a point where Venezuela has had to rely solely on oil exports. But here the socialist Chavez made the big mistake of ruining even the oil industry. Most crude oil is divided into two main categories. Light oil is of good quality and is sold at a high price, while heavy oil used in Venezuela is of low quality and requires the refinery technology of an oil company. At the time, only 14 oil refineries had such advanced refining technology. However, when it was predicted oil prices would rise, Chavez forcibly expelled 14 oil companies and tried to nationalize the oil industry where private companies had been operating, namely the government industry. In other words, the government tried to nationalize the oil industry to increase its revenue. This nationalization plan by Chavez was regarded as a recipe for dictatorship. Venezuela, which has relied on foreign companies' technology, was able to run some of the factories left behind, but did not have the skills to reinstall old equipment over time. After all, even if they had a lot of oil, they didn't have the technology to properly develop it. In this way, Venezuela was only well advertised as a welfare state where people can live happily while spending their oil money. These problems continue after Chavez's death in 2013. The economic structure had already collapsed, and Nicolas Maduro took Chavez's place as president. Maduro is currently the president of Venezuela. He is so obsessed with Chavez's policy that he calls himself a Chavez follower. The Chavez and Maduro regimes have been promoting socialism and anti-American ideas, but the US government has been strengthening financial sanctions on Venezuela. In fact, the US has been reducing Venezuelan oil imports since 2006. And in 2018, amid domestic and international criticism, President Maduro succeeded in winning his second six-year term. However, most countries in the world did not recognize this result, saying it was a fraudulent election. In 2019, the United States imposed an oil export embargo, Venezuela's last source of funding. Even so, at a time when the country's future was at stake, the economy began to crash out of control as sanctions were imposed on Venezuela. Like Chavez, Maduro, who made warfare a top priority, started printing money as a countermeasure. When the country ran out of money and it became difficult to maintain warfare, a lot of money started to be released into the market, and the value of the currency plummeted accordingly. One chicken, which had been $10, cost more than $5,000 within 1 year. It is not the person who has a lot of money who is rich, but the person who has chickens who is rich. Venezuela's currency plummeted, leaving money lying on the street. Venezuelans could even make crabs with banknotes, as hyperinflation turned money into scraps of paper. In actual transactions, it is difficult to count money anymore, so people pay by weighing bundles of money. Or instead of using money, or they trade by barter or exchange. The economy has completely returned to the Stone Age, but the real problem was that 90% of the country started starving. There was no food or drinking water available, so residents had to dig wells to use groundwater. The police failed to function, so looting and killings were rampant in the streets. And Venezuela's homicide rate eventually ranked first in the world, making it notorious as the most dangerous country. It took less than 10 years for an oil-rich country to become a poor country that lacks even drinking water. The coronavirus pandemic that just happened was nothing short of a final blow to Venezuela's faltering economy. Recently, as the war between Russia and Ukraine escalated, the United States banned Russian energy imports. The US government is trying to fill the gap by using Venezuela's crude oil as an alternative. In the United States, the pros and cons of this phenomenon in Venezuela are ongoing because President Maduro, who is following a socialist path, supports Russia. Moreover, Venezuela's production capacity is too low to produce the large amount of crude oil that the US needs at once. As such, after years of recession, Venezuela is facing its worst economic crisis, and pain and damage has been passed on to its people, and the future of Venezuela is looking darker.